Hello and welcome to God in Film, the podcast where a Christian and an atheist dive into the best that cinema has to offer and see if we can find any parallels with the gospel or any other Bible stories. I'm filmmaker and Asgardian actor Giles Goff.
And I'm sauce maker and Lord of the Underworld, Phil Coleman. How did you know?
And today we're doing something we've never done before. We're returning to a series of films from a character we've previously covered. In our second series, we looked at Thor and focused most of our discussion on the first film. Today, we'll be looking at Ragnarok and Love and Thunder. So, sorry, Dark World fans, both of you, but there just really wasn't that much to talk about with it.
I am one of those fans. I actually quite like the Dark World. I don't know why everyone hated it.
Yeah,
so much,
it's fine. It's just there's not a lot to say, really.
Thor: The Dark World was a film.
Yes. We'll be asking, what do the Greeks have to do with how we see God, and what does it mean to let someone go? So, Phil, what did you think of these films?
Ragnarok, when that came out, I absolutely loved it. It had the right amount of balance between action and comedy. It had some decent interaction between the characters, and it had Jeff Goldblum in it, which, to be honest, I feel as though I could have started with that, and that would have been sufficient as to why that film was great. Love and Thunder, for me, it just didn't hit the right notes for me.
Yeah.
Some decent set pieces, really cool to see Jane Foster as Thor. Spoilers, by the way. Yeah, I just thought it was a bit forced in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I feel sorry for Taika in a way because he took Thor in such a radically different direction with Ragnarok, and it was irreverent, it was cheeky, and the rest of it. It cleaned up at the box office, so I imagine somebody went, "That's brilliant, do more of that." In fact, the entire fandom basically said, "That's brilliant, do more of that." And then he came back, he did more of that thing, and then we all went, "No, we don't like it."
Yeah. The best part about that film was Christian Bale. Like, by a country mile.
100%. Yeah, Taika, we love you. We can't wait to see what you do next.
Yes.
Now, Phil, has your wife met Matt Heslop?
Do you know, I do not believe she has.
Good. Keep it that way. Because once she gets an eyeful of that tasty hunk of manliness, something in your relationship will just imperceptibly change.
I'm going to be honest, I'm already threatened. You know, like just knowing he's still on the same landmass as me at somewhere.
And so you should be. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's time for Matt's Facts.
Matt's Facts.
Hi everyone, it's Matt here with some facts today about Thor.
Matt, it's so great to have you back again. You did such a cracking, comprehensive job on Thor himself. I thought we'd take a slightly different angle today and talk about two of the most important women in the Thor franchise. So first off, could you tell us about Hela, the shockingly secret older sister that Thor's had?
I can indeed. The first thing to bring about this is how the MCU has changed the character. Mm-hmm. In the films, Hela is his sister, but in the comics, Hela is his niece. Mm-hmm. Hela is the daughter of Loki.
Right.
And the ruler of the realm of Niflheim.
Okay. Yeah, okay, sure.
She's had quite a prolific appearance throughout the comics for a long time. More often than not villainous, as is shown, and not as deeply tied to Ragnarok as she is in the MCU. There's a lot of crossover. She's even had points where she's worked with Mephisto.
So Mephisto is basically an analogue for the devil in the comics, isn't he?
He is indeed. He is the big bad. Mm-hmm. Hela has been through so much. She has lost Hel. She has stolen power from Odin. Mm-hmm. She has turned the Valkyries into fire-eating demons. She has even had relationships with Thanos.
Right. The top list of the bad boyfriends, really, isn't he?
Oh, definitely. She did trick him, though. She was pretending to be deaf herself.
Okay. Let's talk about the mighty Thor.
Right. Mighty Thor, Jane Foster. Well, Jane is actually a very old comic book character. She's been around pretty much the entire time Thor has. Originally, she was a nurse. So in the MCU, she is this physicist, great, smart, brilliant. That's not to say she isn't that in the comics. It's they just took a very different route.
Yeah.
So for the first few decades she was around, she was simply a nurse and a bit of a love interest to Dr. Donald Blake, which was Thor's other counterpart. She went on to get married, and he went on to get with Lady Sif. Now, it was around this time a great thing happened for her character. Her character became a doctor, and this is what begins to link to everything. Because she'd been so close with Thor, there were even a few times where Lady Sif had a bit of a go at her because she thought she was stealing her man, for want of a better term. But Jane got happy. She married Dr. Kincaid, she had a son called Jimmy, and then it all started going downhill. Prepare yourself, listeners. This gets dark. So it all goes downhill just before a run called Original Sin, which was a big Marvel crossover event. But I'm not going to get into too much detail with that.
Okay.
What happens to Jane before that is pure tragedy. She loses her son and husband in a tragic car accident.
Okay, yeah.
And then is diagnosed with cancer.
Oh, of course. Of course.
Throughout this time, she's going around, she's trying to find ways to do it, but she's refusing magical treatment. Now, this is where Original Sin comes in. To give a brief synopsis of that, what happens is Nick Fury kills Uatu the Watcher, an investigation takes place to work out who done it, and as part of a result of this, Nick Fury whispers something in Thor's ear, and this causes Thor to no longer be worthy of wielding Mjolnir. Shortly after this happens, a figure is shown lifting it, a female. It's not revealed who is this new Thor, called the Mighty Thor. Bear in mind, the Thor we all know and love is still going round, but he's now taken the title of Odinson. And the Mighty Thor joins the Avengers, and eventually it's revealed that she is Jane Foster. And the first person to properly find this out is Sam Wilson, who is Captain America.
Yeah.
So it carries on as this, and in the end, she sacrifices Mjolnir. Mjolnir is the only thing keeping her alive. But it's just gone that far. She sacrifices it all, and she's happy. She's accepted her fate. Such a deep character.
What was the fan reaction like to the Mighty Thor? Because I imagine the misogynist wing of Marvel fans were incredibly vocal on it.
To say they were was an understatement. As with anything, people do not like change. But eventually they warmed to the idea. Not everyone did, but most warmed to the idea. Personally, I was intrigued by the way they were going with the storyline. They'd done similar a few times, introduced a new character to kind of take on a mantle, but kept the identity secret for a little bit.
Yeah.
So I was a bit sceptical, but ultimately, personally, I enjoyed how it played out.
Fantastic. Listen, Matt, thank you so much for sharing what you know about Thor, the Mighty Thor and Hela for us. I can't wait for everybody else to hear this.
No problem. Thank you very much. I will see you later.
So, Phil, those were Matt's facts. What do you think?
So, Niflheim. It just reminded me of something out of Futurama, like you know Niffler from Futurama. I don't know if you've watched it, but
yeah,
just remind me of that. It's like I'm just like, is that where he comes from? I also think as well, like if you're gonna have Thanos as your boyfriend, right? It might not be so bad, especially when he's cooking, because everything would be perfectly balanced as all things should be. You know. I think it'd be fine. I see Hell's point, but yeah,
Quite
I
right.
also do think that poor Jane, blooming heck, like. She can't catch a break.
Yeah.
However, she did get to be Thor, and as the kids would say, that's pretty dope. So, you know.
Yeah.
So it's not so bad, I suppose. But yeah, nice one, Matt.
Now, we're going to switch up our format a little bit. So we're going to start off with Finding the Faith in the Film.
Finding the Faith in the Film.
And what we're going to do now in our Finding the Faith in the Film section, we're actually going to have a guest. Now, I first learned about our next guest by introduced to his podcast by my wife Claire. She was delighted when I had the sheer gall to ask him to come on our show, and even more delighted when he said yes. So naturally, I could not keep her out of the interview. You know, I tried bolting the door. I tried recording in a sort of hidden location.
Did you try an electric fence?
I tried a Claire-proof fence.
Ah, I see.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
right.
I sort of like attached copies of Jane Eyre to it in the hope that she'd get distracted whilst trying, but no, it didn't work. She found it.
Yeah, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. You tried your best.
Anyway, I'll let him introduce himself.
My name's Nick Page. I'm a writer, podcaster, speaker. In fact, it's getting me to shut up. That's the trick. And a follower of Jesus. And so I sort of write about all that kind of stuff. And in some of my time, I work for an organisation called Open Doors, which supports the persecuted church. So, you know, that's a good thing as well.
Nick, it is such a joy to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much. Nick is one of the co-hosts of Mid-Faith Crisis podcast, and Claire introduced me to that podcast, and that's why she's here right now because, well, quite frankly, I had absolutely no chance of keeping her out of this one.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a fan, so you didn't have a choice.
Excellent. What a wise woman.
I think so. So we're talking about Thor. We've obviously done an episode on Thor earlier, but we're looking at the two later films, Ragnarok and Love and Thunder. And Zeus turns up, played by Russell Crowe in Love and Thunder. You guys made an interesting point. What does Zeus have to do with how we see God?
Well, I think one of the things about mythologies like Norse mythology or Greek mythology or Roman mythology, which was largely stolen from the Greek, is essentially what you're dealing with humans with superpowers. That is, you know, that's why they're so rich for, you know, Marvel or DC or you know, and I grew up reading comics, so I know all this stuff. They're basically, it's like a soap opera.
Yeah.
You know, and so you have these people with very human sort of fallibilities. I mean, Zeus, you know, he's a bit uncontrolled in the lust department, and you know, he's prone to sort of
pants for love nor money.
He simply cannot keep that toga on, and that would be Jupiter, but anyway, you know, you get the point. And he's got a jealous wife, Hera, and all this kind of stuff. So the lives of the gods are very human in many respects, and the issue is that filters down into sometimes our understanding, say, if the Christian God or you know, deity like that. In other words, it's very hard for us not to see them in human terms, and so pictorially our images of God are very Zeus-like. Actually, they draw very much on classical statuary. If you think of the classic image of God in the Sistine Chapel, for example, you know, an old but fairly muscly man, you know, bearded, grey-haired, you know, but he's pretty hench. Let's be honest. He's that's fundamentally Zeus.
Yeah.
And then of course you get all the other stuff. So just as Zeus in mythology is smiting people with thunderbolts, you get the same kind of thing. So in other words, I think what's happened with Christian history is we tend to see God too easily as a kind of larger Zeus, you know, with all the human characteristics.
Possibly the follow-on question would be, how should we, or where should we even start when it comes to thinking about God? If you had to try and sort of sum it up or approach that, where would you start?
Well, I mean, of course, the truth is we do have to anthropomorphize God to some extent. You can't imagine God as you know, the being that she is, really, and that happens throughout the Bible. That God is imagined with physical characteristics. You know, Moses sees his back. You know, you hear about a God who sleeps, who does all this kind of stuff, and it reaches its high point, I suppose, in that Jesus is a way of imagining God, a way of us to envisage God. Jesus says, "If you've seen me, you've seen the Father," and even that word, Father, is obviously problematic to some people, but it's a way for us to imagine the relationship of God. There's a thing called, I think it's called apophatic theology, which means, that the minute you say something about God, you've, in a sense, got it wrong. Anything you can say about God, any way of describing God is, in a sense, either inadequate or probably sort of misleading. But the fact is, we're stuck in it. We can't help it. We've got to talk about God somehow. So I think it's not really about the anthropomorphizing so much as what kind of figure you imagine God as. Because you have got a straight choice. You could imagine God as Jesus, which is about forgiveness, non-violence, inclusion. Or you can imagine God as Zeus, which is about smitey, slightly unhinged character.
That's incredibly helpful. And like, just as you were talking about that, I started thinking about the Passion of the Christ, which I'm sure is a complicated film in a lot of ways, but that it does have those lovely moments with Jesus where he's with his mum and he's making a table. I think it is. It's just this little scene where he seems incredibly human and has a sense of humour, and I've always really, really loved that. Because it's a very different character to Zeus, isn't it? It's this Middle Eastern, very humble, poor carpenter who's very gentle and with a sense of humour, and I really love that.
I mean, in terms of archaeology, if you want to imagine what Jesus looked like, I mean, obviously we always paint Jesus as a kind of slightly willowy blonde. When I was growing up, I had a children's Bible when I was growing up where he was a sort of slightly ginger blonde as well. I mean, that's very, very unusual colouring for a Mediterranean Jew. But
Which obviously is weird because obviously gingers don't have souls, so I guess that's what's
weird.
Well, that's I couldn't possibly comment. But I did some research for a book some time back about Jesus and trying to imagine what he looked like. And there's this thing called osteoarchaeology, which looks at bones, basically. And they did some analysis. And so you can go with the average height, like of a well-fed Roman man, was about 5'7". That's the average, because they were shorter than us, but the average height of a well-fed Roman man. But the average height of a Mediterranean peasant was 5'2". And of course, dark-skinned, olive complexion, brown eyes, dark black sort of curly hair, probably bearded, would get stopped at every airport security nowadays. And that's Jesus. Jesus was a Mediterranean peasant. I suppose part of the strength, in a sense, about the Bible is that it never really describes what Jesus looks like. We only know two things about what Jesus is Jesus' actual appearance. One is that he was circumcised because he was a Jew, and the other is that he wore a Jewish prayer shawl. So we know those from the Gospels. Otherwise, we don't know anything. So again, that's a very different picture to the one we're normally presented of Jesus.
The prayer shawl. I'm having to sort of dip back all far into my brain. Is this the kind of shawl that doesn't have a seam? Am I thinking of the right thing there?
That's the robe that he was given.
Right.
The shawl is worn by Jewish men, and it has sort of fringe tassels on it. It's still one. And there's that story where the woman who's been bleeding for 12 years reaches out and touches the shawl, touches the tassels of it. And so he knows that power's gone out of him. So we know that. So, what I'm saying is, of course, we all picture Jesus. And by extension, we all sort of picture God. The real question we've got to ask all the time is, well, what are the pictures? Are the pictures helpful? Or are they, in fact, causing a wrong view of God? One of my favourite quotes is from Michael Ramsey, the Archbishop, who said, "God is Christ-like, and in him there is no un-Christ-likeness at all," which is a mind-blowing quote. You have to think about it quite a lot. But that's the sort of shock, in a sense, of Christianity. It's not that Jesus was like God; it's that God is exactly like Jesus. That's the thing. And both of those, all three parts of the Trinity, are entirely unlike the Greek and Jewish pantheon that we see acted out in the films or in Greek mythology.
But of anyone, Jesus is, I guess, going to be the easiest to grasp out of the Trinity, isn't he?
And that's what incarnation is all about. That's why incarnation is so important, because it means that Jesus knows exactly what our lives are like, and like you said, I mean, I think some of the times we tend to see Jesus only in terms of doing Jesus-like things, preaching, healing, walking on water, blah blah blah. actually, he worked for about 14 years probably as a carpenter, as a tekton, which really means builder. So he worked as a builder, and that equally that's not some sort of sideline. That was crucial to his experience of humanity. He sweated, he went to the toilet, he did all these things, that humans do. He had fun, he laughed with people, he ate, he drank, he was accused of over drinking the whole time. So the picture, we always need to work at this picture, I think, of Jesus and by extension of God, really.
100%. Before we let you go, Nick, can you tell us a little bit about your podcast, the Mid-Faith Crisis podcast?
Sure. Mid-Faith Crisis is a podcast for every Christian who's ever sort of stood in church and gone, is this it? What am I doing here? It's for a lot of Christians with a lot of questions, and it's for people basically who are hanging on to faith by their fingertips, who are going through that questioning phase. What we argue in Mid-Faith Crisis is that this is not some kind of blip in the road. It's not something you'll get over. It's actually a really crucial part of your spiritual development. And so we talk about all kinds of things. We talk about quite a lot of films. I love talking about Marvel films, but my co-host Joe, not such a big fan. He likes to go for sort of gritty dramas. With me, if they're not wearing a cape and hitting each other, I'm not particularly interested. But he loves all that. So we talk about a lot of different stuff, but it's really about what does a faith look like when you start to sort of reevaluate things and see things from different perspectives.
Thank you so much for coming on our podcast. We really appreciate it. And Claire's a little bit starstruck.
Oh, shut up. Yeah, definitely appreciate you taking
likewise. Anyway, thank you very much for inviting me. And next time, let's talk about a different, better film. Shall we?
Absolutely. Next time I'm doing any, I'll send you a list and be like, do any of these take your fancy?
Yeah. Be great.
Hi everyone, it's Claire here. As you may have guessed, I absolutely loved recording this interview. If you would like to hear more of us talking to Nick Page about his podcast, The Mid-Faith Crisis, you can go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/GodInFilmPodcast. If you sign up to our Bishop Waller Bridge tier, you can hear that as well as bonus episodes like God in Gaming or God in Music, extended interviews and loads of bonus content. And if you sign up to our Archbishop Spike Lee tier, you get to hear our next episode on Infinity War a week early. So why not check it out? Giles gets so happy when he gets a new patron, he does a little happy dance, and it's just adorable. And now, back to the show.
So Phil, that was Nick Page. What do you think?
So, there was a lot of stuff there that I just wouldn't have thought of.
Yeah.
Like, I actually made some notes.
Oh, right, okay.
I actually made some notes. So, I like the fact that if you try and describe God, you've already got it wrong. Like, that's one of those things I'm just sort of like, oh, so the act of trying is folly. I see. Okay. And I guess, but what I did like about that is that, it means that, okay, you can't really describe God because he's not really a describing sort of thing here, but, it's more of a personal thing,
by sheer virtue of saying he's not really a describing thing, you've got it wrong because you've already referred to him as a male.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
To be fair, exactly.
See what I mean?
That's me just tapping into what I've been shown, the imagery that I've seen. Big white man, big white beard, probably white robes, that kind of thing. That's how I envision God, and I can't help but do that because that's just how it's been ingrained in my mind. Yeah. And I guess it's a personal thing. If whatever helps you connect with God, maybe that's how you think of him. I had a couple of other notes, by the way.
Go for it.
Some of these are superfluous, but apparently I was slightly taller than Jesus, which is great.
Yeah.
Because I'm not really taller than most people, and the fact that he was blamed for over drinking, I thought was hilarious because I think it's great that Christ loved a bev.
I'm coming back to that picture of you having a beer with Jesus, and
geez, right?
Just getting in-depth discussions about different types of microbreweries and stuff like that.
Oh no, it'd be something like, now, do you reckon the Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd was divinely influenced? Because I've got to say, there's some cracking tracks on that album. This is a serious one. I did find it interesting about the concept of doubt being biblical as well.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but I just think you'll find this funny. It reminded me of my mate recently. We were talking about the last couple of years, as it were, since like 2020, and just all the kind of things that have gone wrong over, like just politically and virally, let's say. And he just said to me, he went, I think God's been on his phone the last couple of years. And I thought I better save that one for Giles because he'll love that.
Love it. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to flip things on the head a little bit today. Normally, I'll start with the film and then say, and that's a bit like this. But we're actually going to start with the biblical stuff and see if you can figure out where I'm going with it. Okay?
Okay, let's do this.
We're going to head all the way back to Genesis. And let's be clear, Genesis, crazy. Okay? This is one of the books that is thought to have been written by Moses, but we don't know for sure. It's the first book of the Bible, so you've got the creation story in there, or through to Noah, and then the three patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. And we're going to talk about Jacob and Esau. Okay. I'm going to give you a lot of what's going on here. So we've got Isaac, who is the son of Abraham. So Genesis 25:21. Isaac prayed hard to God for his wife because she was barren. God answered his prayer and Rebecca became pregnant. But the children tumbled and kicked inside her so much that she said, if this is the way it's going to be, why go on living? Which I think a lot of pregnant women can definitely relate to that.
I remember my wife pregnant and she did not have a fun time with pregnancy. So
She went to God to find out what was going on. God told her, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 peoples butting heads while still in your body. 1 people will overpower the other, and the older will serve the younger. So, kind of feel like God should have told her, just have a lie down, take things easy. And,
put on Star Trek The Next Generation and make a cup of tea, like...
Exactly, yeah. Anyway, when her time to give birth came, sure enough, there were twins in her womb. The first came out reddish, as if snugly wrapped in a hairy blanket. I should say, I'm reading from... the Message translation, which is probably one of the most modern versions. So if it sounds a little unbiblical, that's why. It's because it's trying to sound as modern as possible.
Sure.
The first came out reddish, as if snugly wrapped in a hairy blanket. They named him Esau, which means hairy. His brother followed, his fist clutched tight to Esau's heel. And they named him Jacob, which means heel.
All right. I didn't know that.
Yeah. The boys grew up, and Esau became an expert hunter, an outdoorsman, and Jacob was a quiet man, preferring life indoors among the tents. Isaac loved Esau because he loved his game, as in hunting.
Yeah.
But Rebecca loved Jacob. So already the parenting is screwed here. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's not how it's meant to work.
One day Jacob was cooking a stew. Esau came in from the field, starved. Esau said to Jacob, give me some of that red stew, I'm starved. Jacob said, make me a trade. My stew for your rights as the firstborn.
I'm remembering this now, yeah.
Already, you'd be looking at the terms and conditions going, hang on, that doesn't sound quite right, you know?
I'm going to hire a contract lawyer in a minute, I swear.
Esau said, what good is a birthright if I'm dead? Jacob said, first swear to me. And he did it. That's how Esau shrugged off his rights as the firstborn. So, if it was just this situation, you'd be thinking, Jacob, bit of a dick.
Yeah, it's a bit dysfunctional, just in general, actually. The whole family,
Yeah, there's something really not right there. Now, if you're ready for some more Old Testament family dysfunction, get ready for this. So this is Genesis 27.
I'll let me get comfortable.
So we've already had his birthrights, his legal birthright to inherit his father's property and everything. He's traded it away, and somehow that is legally binding. Okay, fine, whatever.
Old Testament law be cray.
Yeah, see what I mean about crazy,
Yeah, it's a bit strange.
So really, Esau's not got a lot left. He knows that his brother's going to get the lion's share of everything because he had to make a trade in really unfavourable circumstances. So the only thing that he's got left now is like a blessing, okay? And a blessing is seen as almost like a tangible thing at this point.
Sure.
It's like or a finite thing, probably would be a better way to put it.
I don't know why the first thing came to my head was like a voucher. You know, like a coupon maybe or something. Like if it's tangible, then.
Yeah. So let me read this bit out of Genesis 27. It's a little bit longer. When Isaac had become an old man, was nearly blind, he called his eldest son Esau and said, "My son, I'm an old man," he said. "I might die any day now. Do me a favour. Get your quiver of arrows and your bow and go out in the country and hunt me some game. Then fix me a hearty meal, the kind that you know I like, and bring it to me to eat so that I can give you my personal blessing before I die." Rebecca, that's his mum, was eavesdropping as Isaac spoke to his son Esau. As soon as Esau had gone off to the country to hunt game for his father, Rebecca spoke to her son Jacob. "I just overheard your father talking with your brother Esau. Now, my son, listen to me. Do what I tell you. Go to the flock and get me 2 young goats. Pick the best. I'll prepare them into a hearty meal. Then you'll take it to your father. He'll eat and bless you before he dies." "But mother," Jacob said, "my brother Esau is a hairy man and I have smooth skin. What happens if my father touches me? I'll bring down a curse on myself instead of a blessing." So this is Jacob. Jacob's first thought is, "Oh no, I'll get caught," rather than, "Wait, isn't this a completely terrible thing to do?"
Yeah, no, there's quite a lot of stuff that's wrong here. Like,
Yeah.
in general, actually.
So then Rebecca says, "Just do what I say, go and get the goats." So he went and got them, brought them to his mother, and she cooked a hearty meal. Rebecca took the dress-up clothes of her older son Esau and put them on her younger son Jacob. She took the goat skins and covered his hands and the smooth nape of his neck. Then she placed a hearty meal she had fixed and fresh bread she'd baked into the hands of her son Jacob. He went to his father and said, "My father." "Yes," he said, "which son are you?" "I am your firstborn, Esau. I did what you told me. Come now, sit up and eat of my game so you can give me your personal blessing." Isaac said, "Come close, son, let me touch you. Are you really my son, Esau?" The voice is Jacob's, but the hands are the hands of Esau. But as he was about to bless him, he pressed him. He said, "You're sure? You are my son, Esau?" Yes, I am." Then Isaac said, "Come close, son, and kiss me." He came close and kissed him, and Isaac smelled the smell of his clothes. Finally he blessed him. And then right after Isaac had blessed Jacob and Jacob had left, Esau showed up from the hunt. His father Isaac said, "And who are you?" "I am your son, your firstborn, Esau." Isaac started to tremble, shaking violently. He said, "Then who hunted game and brought it to me? I finished the meal just now before you walked in, and I blessed him. He's blessed for good."
Good grief.
Yeah.
That's just nasty.
Yeah. Moving on to like verse 38, he says, "But don't you have just one blessing for me, father?" Esau sobbed inconsolably. Isaac said to him, "You'll live far from earth's bounty, remote from heaven's dew. You'll live by your sword, hand to mouth, and you will serve your brother, but when you can't take it anymore, you'll break loose and run free." Esau seethed in anger against Jacob because of the blessing his father had given him. He brooded, "The time for mourning my father's death is close, and then I'll kill my brother Jacob."
I do see his point there. You know what I mean? I think
100%.
I'd probably think about doing a bit of killing if that was the case, you know.
And I know it sounds daft, like we're talking about the idea of a blessing, but if you imagine like a political endorsement, you can't touch it, you can't see it, but if a person endorses multiple candidates for the same thing, then it takes away the power of it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's a weird one, this one. But these two brothers, do they remind you of anyone?
I've got a feeling there's a theme here, and I think it's Thor and Loki, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. The fact that Thor is Odin's favourite and Loki is Frigga's favourite and that sort of thing, you know. So we are seeing that kind of connection there. And the fact that one relies on his strength, the other one relies on being tricky. I'm not saying that Stanley and Jack Kirby stole straight from the Old Testament on this one, but you do get a feeling that it might be an unconscious influence here. Do you know what I mean?
I feel like they might have been a teensy bit influenced, even if a teensy bit inspired, let's say, even if they didn't realise it.
And of course, assuming that Stanley was a good Jewish boy and paid attention when he was in temple, then these are the kind of stories he would have known really well, because Jacob also has another name. He's called Israel. Okay?
Right.
So the Jewish people are descended from Jacob. So, do you remember we talked about a guy who worked for 14 years to marry, he works for 7 years to marry the girl of his dreams. He's tricked. He has to work for another 7 years. So it's 14 years in total. Do you remember that one?
I think so.
We talked about it in our Fleabag episode, I think, in terms of celibacy and stuff like that.
Okay, I'll have to revisit that once. For some reason I just can't recall it right now.
Yeah. So that's Jacob as well. Same guy, okay? Jacob is this guy, he has to run away because his brother wants to kill him, and fair enough, frankly, after all the nonsense you put him through.
Yeah, I'd be pretty annoyed.
So, and what is weird is normally, in terms of Old Testament stories, it's usually, and this person who is our patriarch did some shaky things, but they were still great, and yet here, it's so strange because if these characters are fictional, why would a Jewish author create a patriarch that is so sketchy as hell? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, because if this was a created allegory, as it were, for lack of a better term, why would they sort of give people against them the ammunition? I guess.
Yeah, which is why it leads me to think that there must be some grain of truth to what's happening here, and it probably is just a grain, but there's got to be some grain of truth, because if you're trying to create a story for yourself, it seems odd to me that you would make something so unflattering,
Yeah, I find that very weird,
especially for the person who you name your country after.
Yeah, especially for that. He's the way that Jacob appears to be presented, or Israel is presented, from what you've told me at the very least, he just seems like a right little schemer.
Yeah. So, like I say, it fits really well for the whole Thor and Loki combination, doesn't it?
I think it does, yeah. Loki's obviously the god of mischief.
Yeah.
He's a trickster. Most of his magic's based around fooling people or finding his way out of things. And he's also very intelligent as well, whereas Thor is more brute strength and natural sort of leadership.
Well, it's funny. Thor certainly starts off as being the dumb one, but as the series goes on, you really start to see he has this level of intelligence that it's always clicking along. And I wanted to draw particular attention to one specific scene in Ragnarok. I know we've ended up looking at Love and Thunder first and then Ragnarok, but I don't know, some kind of chaotic Taika Waititi energy going into my planning here.
Do you know what? There's a multiverse now. There's variants of everybody. I don't think it matters.
There's one scene in Ragnarok that happens about an hour and a half into the film, and it's Thor and Loki are trying to escape Sakaar and trying to get off the planet, and it is a blink and you'll miss it scene. There's so much visual spectacle in that. I honestly did not pay attention to the gravitas of it, but Thor and Loki are in a elevator and they're about to do the get help routine.
Yes.
In order to get the ship and rest it. And there's this whole thing where Loki has just said, so I think I'm going to stay on Sakaar, and Thor goes, no, I completely agree with you. That sounds like a really good idea. And Loki's shocked. He's like, oh, you're agreeing with me. It's like, because he expects Thor to try and change his mind. But Thor has said this planet is lawless, it's chaotic, it's perfect for you. Loki responds with, I didn't realise you thought so little of me. And then Thor responds with, Loki, I thought the world of you. I thought we were going to fight side by side forever. But at the end of the day, you're you and I'm me. I don't know, maybe there's still some good in you, but let's be honest, our paths diverged a long time ago. And
yeah,
it wasn't until I watched the Taika Waititi video that he did promoting this for Vanity Fair, where he actually explains this is Thor letting go of his brother.
I think that shows a great degree of emotional intelligence.
Yeah,
from Thor. He's just like, right, well, do you know something? I have really tried, and I don't need to anymore.
And it's so strange for me, this one, because we're taught so much that love is about forgiveness, and it is about trying to be in each other's lives, and just okay. Let me put it this way, right?
Yeah,
I've had friends in my life who sometimes I've drifted apart from, you know,
Sure.
or sometimes we've had an argument with each other, and we've not spoke for a while, and they've just kind of drifted out of my life. And I know with an alarming level of clarity that if somebody falls out of my life, then that is definitely the way they wanted it, and it's definitely not my fault, because I'll have messaged them, I'll have said, hey, can we talk sometime? Can we do this? I'll have invited them to stuff. I'll have tried to rebuild that bridge.
Yeah.
So if that relationship falls apart, I can look back and go, okay, well, I did all the things, you know, I tried.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? Like you try and do your best. But some people, it happens. I think with even like, you know, great friends, like you just sometimes grow and go down different paths.
Yeah.
I know that there was one particular person I used to be very, very good friends with, but it was very one-sided. And like I no longer speak to that person anymore. But for the longest time, I thought maybe like I could repair things, and it took a lot of energy and sort of upset on my part to basically just go, right, no.
Yeah.
And I think that takes time and just being at a certain experience level, I guess. If I'm going to put it in a gaming term. But
I think with friendships, we sort of expect each other. We expect that sometimes people are going to drift in and drift out, and we have some intense friendships, and we know that context-wise they can come to an end. I think it's trickier when it's family.
Yeah.
Now, this may take you by surprise, Phil,
Yeah.
but not everybody has such a good relationship with their brother that they go into making sauces together as a business proposition. You know?
Yes. No. I'm aware that I am very lucky in that respect. And even though there's sometimes, and if you are listening, Rob, sorry for this next sentence, but there are some times when I could absolutely rip his head off his shoulders. But you can sometimes argue, you can sometimes be very, very abrasive towards each other, but I don't know. I feel like sometimes you find a way to come back. At least one part of the one side will try as harder than the other, maybe.
Yeah.
You know, that can happen as well.
And I'm on the flip side to that of like, this is where we take advantage of the fact my family don't listen to this. I feel like in a lot of ways I've tried everything that I can try with this one particular relationship. And in the end, what it breaks down to is we're completely different people, and there is how can I put it, until I can see some change in that other person, there's no way that we can have a relationship, because we're going to get trapped in this loop where we have a massive fallout, and then we don't speak for ages, and then it kind of thaws for a little bit, no pun intended, and
I didn't catch that one at first.
we start to develop a decent relationship, and then I'll say just the teensiest thing that he won't like, or I'll do something that he's not happy with, and I will try my absolute best to be as reasonable and balanced as possible, and it'll still blow up in my face, and I'll still have less than nothing to show for it. Now, that sucks on its own, but how can I put it? Those people who will say things like, well, you're a Christian, you're supposed to forgive each other, or you're supposed to love each other, they really kind of burrow into your brain a little bit. Do you know what I mean?
I can imagine that being quite frustrating, because you know it's yeah, fine. You know, forgiveness is a big part of Christianity and a big part of, you know, your belief system. But there's got to be a line somewhere. Like you can't be getting trampled on all the time, by this other person. That's just not healthy.
And obviously, Jesus modeled loads of different ways that you can resolve something with somebody. Like, Peter literally said 3 times over, "I do not know this guy," just as Jesus was being tortured, And Jesus found a way to repair that relationship, and he found a way to do it that actually involves coming back from the dead. So it was clearly a priority for Jesus. Do you know what I'm saying?
We don't all have that luxury, I think.
But if there's free will, right, then how can I put it? You might be doing the best to follow Jesus, and you might be doing the best to sort of do these things. Or even from the atheist side of things, you might be doing your best to be a sort of gentle and fully rounded and caring individual. But if the other person's not willing to try, then you're stuffed, aren't you?
You can only do so much, I think, until you need to actually have some kind of reciprocation.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just exhausting.
Exactly.
And unhealthy.
There is a little bit of a biblical guidance for what to do in this situation. So Jesus says at one point in Matthew 10:11-14, he's sending his disciples out to all different places, like, I need you to tell people about me. I can't get around them myself. And he's also preparing them for when he's not here,
Obviously, this is the time before, Twitter and that. So it's quite hard to get the word out.
Exactly. So Jesus tells them in verse 11, "Whatever town or village you enter, search there for some worthy person to stay at their house until you leave. As you enter their home, give it your greeting. If the home is deserving, let your peace rest on it. If it is not, let your peace return to you. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, leave that home or town and shake the dust off your feet." And that is harsher than you would expect from Jesus,
It makes a point, though. Yes, okay. It may seem harsh, but it's a better way of doing it all round than just beating a dead horse.
Yeah. And this is the thing, and I am extrapolating here, so I am not able to necessarily take something exactly what Jesus said from my situation. I'm working on something that Jesus said and trying to apply it to a thing, and maybe I'm wrong, and if I am, please somebody tell me. But if I tweak this a little bit, if this person doesn't want to invite you in, if this person rejects you and won't listen to you, then leave that person and shake the dust off your feet. Because what I feel like Jesus is effectively telling us is it is okay to leave an abusive situation or a dysfunctional situation.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense, yeah.
I feel like Jesus recognized that sometimes we need to triage our relationships. We need to sort of work on the ones that we can improve on, and the ones that are too far gone, we just have to let them go. And to be clear, that doesn't mean you shut things down forever. That doesn't mean this person is dead to me. Haha. It's just saying I'm not going to do the running anymore. Because coming back to Jacob and Esau literally wanted to kill that dude. And yet, a few chapters later in Genesis 35, after Isaac dies, it says, "Then he breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people, old and full of years. And his sons Esau and Jacob buried him." And it's a tiny little throwaway line, but it does tell us that there had to be some kind of resolution for them both to come back and bury their father. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, they put aside their differences for something bigger than themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's good that they managed to do that. Nice one, guys.
So, by all means, we can keep hoping and praying for reconciliation, but we don't have to chase after it anymore.
I think that's a good point. I think I agree with that.
And I think we'll end it there then. So
Seems like a pretty nice, neat way to end it.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to this far too heartfelt and earnest episode of God in Film.
There's a lot of soft speaking, and you know when the soft speaking comes out, that's when things are about to get real.
Join us next week for all the fun and lols that was Infinity War. We can't wait to see you. Phil, I always feel like I'm asking a stupid question with this one now. Have you had a good time?
I did have a good time. It was nice to talk about things that are worth mulling over and considering.
Awesome. Me too. See you soon, listeners. Bye.
Bye.
God in Film is hosted and created by Giles Goff and
Phil Coleman.
mixing and editing by Giles. Our logo was designed by
Julie Walsh.
and our theme tune was composed by
Rick Lee.
Waffle editing by
Natalie Miniker.
God in Film is a Dash production. Please rate and review. Unless it's a 1-star, in which case, travel to the center of the universe via the Shadow Realm and use Stormbreaker to open the gates to eternity. When you finally stand in front of eternity, that abstract concept personified who will grant a wish to the first person to seek them out, then just politely ask them for Giles and Phil to make a better episode this time.